Hi, how's it going? This is Mr. Miles, and this is our very first official podcast. It's the first one of many. And if it's terrible, don't worry, I'm sure with time I will get better at this. But let's just start it off. So we're going to talk about the important thing right here, what you all came here to see, science. And why science? Why do I take a science class? What's important about science? I'm going to go over a little bit of how I want my class to run to hopefully get as many of you students interested in science as possible. The reason I'm doing that is because in recent years there has been a huge decline. That's an arrow pointing down. I don't think drawings are exactly the best. A huge decline in students going to college and studying to be scientists, studying to be engineers. Oh, where'd I go? Studying to be engineers. Why is there that huge decline? I think that a lot of it might come back to the fact of what students perceive, what they see as science. And they think either, oh, it's boring, or I've heard sometimes it's lame, or it's dumb, or it's I'm not smart enough. And the whole thing is, a lot of the kids I've talked to, especially around this age, they all love science. A lot of the kids that I talked to during the open house and when we had that big parent meeting a few months back, they all mentioned to me how excited they were to be inside of a science classroom. So the question is, what happens in between middle school and high school that makes children dislike science? Because most of the high schoolers I talked to, those are where all those answers are coming from. And I think in between there is they get a really big misconception of what science actually is. And I'm going to try and create a science classroom that really shows what science is. So that way we get more people actually interested in science than we have in the past. Now, how I focus everything on and the big thing that surrounds my philosophy of teaching science classes is this: the question. And I guess the question falls with any classroom. Depending on how a teacher approaches it, but I really want to tackle this thing head on, the question. Because a lot of you are familiar with the scientific method. If you're not, I'll give you a really brief thing. So the first thing you have your observation. After your observation, you have your hypothesis. I'm just kidding, I know it's a hypothesis, but I like to drive people insane by saying that. It's your hypothesis. And then you have your test. Now, obviously, this is a very simplified version. There are more steps to it. There is more detail that goes into these things. But for space purposes, we're just going to go over this, and simplicity purposes. So the first thing is our observation. So in our class, sometimes we'll have the students observing. Oh, look at that. That's very interesting. Or you can have Mr. Miles observing. So we have our observation. With that, we come up with our hypothesis, and that is the question and the answer to the question. So this is kind of going inside of here. Now once we have that answer, we can then test it. Once we run those tests, we go back and see, hey, does our test, do our answers confirm with hypothesis? If it does, then we can go on and we can keep testing. But in the meantime, we have something called a theory. Now if it doesn't match it, that means our answer was wrong. Our guess, which is a hypothesis, an educated guess, was wrong. So we have to start all over again. Not completely, but we got to tweak it a little bit. So that's why that question is so important. So in the class, I'm going to try my best to give your students questions that they're going to have to come up with an answer to, their hypothesis. Or I'll get all of them saying it by the end of the year, their hypothesis. So they're going to come up with their hypothesis, and then they're going to learn how to test these things. And they're going to check, was the answer right or was the answer wrong? And this is kind of how I want to run the classroom. Now that's the underlying principle, but the question is, what kind of activities are we actually going to be doing in order to use this classroom model? Well, the first thing that I find extremely important, and please don't groan too loud about this, I can almost already hear it inside my head, is the vocab. I'm trying to be hip, I'm trying to be cool, so I'm going to abbreviate things because that's how kids do in text messaging nowadays. But you have the vocab. The vocabulary is extremely important, especially in science class, because for a lot of you that are taking Spanish that don't speak it already, you're learning a new foreign language. The whole thing is science is a foreign language to most people. A lot of the words come from Latin. A lot of the words are just foreign. You don't use them every single day. How many times a day do you say, well, I was existing in the biosphere today, and, stuff like that. Now, the reason vocab is so important is because whenever you're taking tests, whenever you're trying to figure something out, it could be the easiest thing in the world. But if you don't understand what the words mean, you're not going to get it right. Think of it this way. Let's say you're sitting here, you're all happy, and you speak no Russian. No Russian in your vocabulary. Sorry, there's an interruption bell. There's no Russian in your vocabulary. And you're going to go and sit down and take a test. Now, the test is then written in Russian, and one of the questions on this Russian test has a picture of a dog. That's my terrible dog. And the question asks, how many dogs are in the picture? Well, obviously, if it was in English, you could look at that and say, well, there's one dog, and all of us could get it right. Now, if this was written in Russian and we had no idea what it's saying, I would say that most, if not all of us, would get it wrong. We'd be writing answers like, cute, oh, look, a puppy. And somebody might get creative and write this. I don't know. Either way, it would be extremely hard, and science follows the exact same principle. If you don't know the language, you can't answer questions. You're going to have a really hard time, and you're going to struggle. So that's why we're going to focus a lot on vocabulary. We have a wonderful thing that a lot of you parents got to see, and that's the word wall. The word wall will come very handy throughout the year. Because up here, whenever we learn a new vocab word, we're always going to make sure that we discuss the vocab word and we constantly review it. And so that way, your students will be literate in science and they'll be able to answer all those easy puppy questions. When you guys go and take the proficiencies in a couple of years, they're going to be asking you science questions, and if you know that vocabulary, it will be the easiest thing you've ever done. Now, another thing with the word wall and with vocabulary is how you're learning vocabulary. And a lot of times kids groan when they hear the word vocabulary because they think it's very boring to learn, because all it is it's the word and it's the definition. But in this class, I want to make it a little bit more fun. I want to collaborate with students, get them a little bit more creative than they normally do. And I want to have different activities for learning the vocab. We're going to have something called the vocab rotation, where one time when we're learning vocab, you could get, you find the word, find the definition, kind of get it. Or you could be assigned with your group to doing the picture. Again, I'm abbreviating so I can be really cool. You can do the picture, or you can act it out. I have a bunch of different activities that you'll all draw from a hat, and that's the activity of how you're going to do it. And that's that whole method. If anybody knows this, the 7 times 7, 7 different ways, or 7 times in 7 different ways, this is what's really going to help us remember vocabulary. So maybe you're not the best person at remembering exactly the word and the definition. Maybe a picture is going to help you remember, or acting it out is going to help you remember. When you see your friend Matt getting up there and acting out ecosystem, however creatively he wants to do it, I think that would be really hard, but if he wants to act that one out, you're going to remember it. Now, on top of that, we're also going to work on tech, also known as technology. Now, the thing is, between, I believe it's 1995 and since the beginning of time, there's a lot of information in between there. A lot of information generated by humans. But the whole thing is, in one day, we generate more information because of the internet than we do between 1995 and the beginning of time. In just one day, more information. And every single day, that increases. Now, on there's a lot of really useful information. A lot of you, I'm sure, have used Wikipedia. And I know a lot of people want to bash Wikipedia. I have done, changed the editing a little bit myself, but they are getting better and better at it every single time. There's a lot of really good resources and journals you can go on to find. There's also a lot of really pointless things. There's a lot of really pointless things that you find on the internet. So using technology is, I really want to teach the students that you don't have to be the biggest genius to even know it all, because everything is at your fingertips. We have amazing things. Like if you're a visual person like I am, I like to go online, and if I need to learn how to do something, I use YouTube. I learned how to build computers just using YouTube. And if you know how to search for things in Google, you can do almost anything. And that's the wonderful thing about the internet. But the problem is, because I said we generate that much information in just one day, it's how do you tell what's important? How do you tell what's irrelevant? And how do we find the things that are important? And so using technologies, using computers, using the internet, is we're going to try and use all of our resources to become extremely internet savvy and know how to find things all the way across the web. And that's another thing that we're going to try and put together this year. The other thing we're going to have is we're going to have collaboration. Now, a lot of times in science, when you think of it, you think of worksheets. You think of the boring teacher, I wish I had a mustache in school, droning on, and then handing out worksheets. Now, I'm not going to bash completely on worksheets because worksheets are important because they help us learn new information, they help us review information. There's a lot of really good things, but when the whole thing becomes worksheets, then that's just going to put you to sleep. And that's going to turn from that middle school to the high school mentality of I love science to I absolutely hate science. And when you sign me up for a science class, I absolutely hate you. So in order to make it a little bit more fun and have you feel more like a real scientist, is we're going to have a lot of collaboration. At least every single day, I want to try and get it. Sorry, that guy's eyes are really messed up. I want to try and get it so I have students talking to each other. Remember, it all focuses around the big thing that I love more than anything else. Let's see if my panel will change. There we go. Sometimes it's a little bit delayed. The question. So these two students are going to be sharing what they think the answer to a question is. And because of this, instead of just having his mind, we also have now his mind. And usually groups will come in 6 or more. Maybe sometimes smaller, sometimes maybe we'll get 3. But instead of just one mind, we're getting either 6 or 3 minds. Now, on top of that, I want students to be going home and getting used to asking their parents or their siblings or somebody else. So I'm talking to them and say, you talk to your family, you have a large family, and you talk to 6 different members. You take that 6 and you bring it back, and now between these two guys who has one mind, bringing in the 6, we have 7, which equals, who can do the math? 8. Now we have 8 minds, but if he's doing the same thing that he is, then we have even more. And then if we have big groups of 6, then we have even more. So it can get kind of ridiculous at how many great ideas we can come up with if we learn how to collaborate. And that's how scientists really do work. They need to talk to people besides just themselves, otherwise they would seem a little bit crazy. And so that's why collaboration is going to be extremely important. So pretty much all this filters into one thing. Becoming. Becoming what? Becoming a scientist. Everything that I'm doing in this class is to have the student feel what it really feels like to be a scientist. Sometimes it may be a little bit monotonous to be a real scientist. Sometimes it may be a little bit boring. But at the same time, it can be extremely exciting. It can be really rewarding. And that's the kind of feel that I want students to get, so they don't have that mentality from middle school of I love science to high school where they absolutely hate it. Because a lot of times they just don't understand what being a scientist really is. I don't know why he's smiling. I was actually thinking about making a grumpy face, but that didn't work. And so that's what I'm really going to try and focus on this year, is letting the students feel like they're really wearing that lab coat. When we do labs, if you really want to bring in your own lab coat, feel free. And I can't draw lab coats, but sure, why not? And if you want to bring in the pocket protector, that's okay. Anyone who wears glasses, I wear glasses, so it's okay. Most of the time I wear contacts, but I'll bring my glasses too. So that way we can feel like scientists. So that way, when they're signing up for college and they're deciding what they want to do, they can hopefully think back and be like, hey, that's what a real scientist is like, and maybe I want to sign up for it. If they don't, that's okay. The world needs plenty of other professions to help it keep turning. But leading innovation, leading all the technology that we get to use throughout the day, throughout the years, it's going to come from the scientists, and it's going to come from students like you who 10 years from now, 20 years from now, grow up and make the great big next invention. That'll be awesome. So that is my first podcast. I hope I didn't bore you to death with it. I hope it made sense and it wasn't too sporadic. I'm sure the other ones will be a little bit better because this is kind of, trying to get the whole big picture of what the class is going to be and trying to put it to a small amount of time, so that way I don't get people falling asleep listening to my voice drone on and on for hours. So any comments, questions, or suggestions, feel free to talk to me in class, or if you want to, feel free to email me at bmiles It's Somerset, North Las Vegas.org. All right. Take care. Until next time. This is Mr. Miles. And I really don't know how to end this, so I'll just say over and out. How's that sound? Sound good? Okay.